Right, well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 97 of Retropower Uncut. And this week, Cal's on holiday. I was on holiday last week, Cal's on holiday this week. So I'll be doing the whole walk around this week and probably forget lots of things and probably get in a muddle on the stuff I'm not really au fait with. But we'll start right here because we've literally just about 20 minutes ago unpacked some goodies that Nitron Suspension have sent to us, which we've been waiting for the Project 1 Mark 1 Escort and also its sister car, the second Mark 1 Escort that we're building. The two side-by-side, well, they should be side-by-side projects. Through metalwork, they're going to be one following on from the other. However, the suspension units, the damper units, coilover damper units have now arrived. And that's perfect timing, really, because we're just about at the stage where we're going to need these for the dry build on the car for the mock-up of all the suspension parts. So yeah, beautiful job as always with Nitron, and yeah, we've just unpacked those and they're all pretty much ready to go. I've got a few other bits, but that you'll see all that develop when we build it all up with the other parts. We're using the Rick's Engineering hub carriers that go into these struts, which are the front struts, and we're using a modified Mark 1 Freelander rear hub carriers that will be going into these, which are the rear struts. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get through to the other side and have a look at the car itself. So yeah, that's just a nice thing to kick off with. I'm going to pick up my can of drink because I'm absolutely parched and I'll probably lose my voice part way through. But we'll wander this way past the engine room where there isn't a Toyota engine, a Toyota V8 anymore, because it's now come round here. We'll wander around to the Land Cruiser and we'll pick up from there, I think. I'm going to go this way, past various other things that we'll mention in a minute, but onto the Land Cruiser. And the obvious change is that we received a torque converter from Lister's Toyota in Nuneaton. I think I've mentioned before, but I don't know, I'd forgotten names. It's David Hefford is the parts man we deal with there, who's absolutely brilliant, so on the ball. Anytime we go to him with a question on a part or details on parts, he's straight back, really fast response. And we had a bit of a game working out which torque converter we actually needed for this application, because it's obviously a bit of a mishmash, but we now have the right one. That arrived yesterday. Yesterday or the day before, can't remember. It arrived not very long ago anyway. And today, Adam has now got Adam and John between them have got that all put together. That's gone pretty well. We had a little bit of a question over the spacing, the flex plate to torque converter spacing, but I think we've decided that was okay. It was a little bit wider than I'd have expected, but we've decided that was okay. It's certainly not losing drive on the oil pump or anything, so we're happy with that. And Adam's got the other thing we were waiting for last week still, was the bolts for the sump. So we have now got those. Adam wanted the correct set of bolts because there are a variety of lengths. So we wanted the correct bolts and then get them plated, which he's done. So they're all in. Transmission's on. We'll get the transfer box on as well, and then that's literally ready to go in the chassis. So that's all good stuff. Chassis over at the other end, so I'll talk about it from here, although that's over there. John's been doing some work on that, getting that ready for the brake lines. Now he's got various bits of the brake lines in, but not all of it yet. But he spec'd out the full list of parts required for the brake lines. Those have all come from our supplier, Nuneaton Hose. We've got all the fittings now, and John started getting all that into the chassis, mounted the brake pressure reduction valve for the rear brakes, planned the route, put the tabs in for where we've got to mount the brake lines into the chassis, and worked out all the fittings for the ends, and he started doing the flexi lines on the axles. I think he's got the bulk of that done now. So yeah, that's progressing nicely. Also picked up over the last week, it was actually the tail end of last week when I was away, the rear doors were trial fitted on the actual body tub, just to check the new billet aluminium hinges, so that we make sure they're okay prior to them going off for anodising. So they've been checked as well. And I know Adam's also been working on various things to do with the brake plumbing. Because we're using this American master cylinder, the fittings are slightly oddball sizes on that. So we've been working on getting hold of the adapters we need for that, because the sizes make it slightly awkward. But I think he's got all that resolved now. So we're pretty much in a position to get the engine and gearbox in the chassis. So the beginning of next week, the task will be getting that into the chassis, and then once that's in the chassis, I think we'll be putting the body on the chassis. So we should see a big leap forward next week, all being well, as long as nothing trips us up. We should see a big leap forward, and hopefully the engine and gearbox in the chassis, and possibly also maybe, if all the plumbing goes well, then the body on the chassis as well. So that's progress on that. I'd been tying up a few little loose ends on the Mustang, but nothing really major to report. Just a few of the little bits of wiring that needed finishing, and a few little bits of fettling around getting headlights to fit, because they didn't fit amazingly well. But that's all good now. Again, not a lot on the Camaro this week, other than that there was a little bit, a couple of the panels that we weren't happy with in the engine bay. Because it's a satin lacquer, if we get any bits in there or there's any blemishes in the finish, then there's nothing we can do about it, because you can't polish it. So there were two panels that we weren't entirely happy with in the engine bay, so we re-prepped and repainted and lacquered those, and they're all now in, and we're really happy with how all that is now. That's all done, so that's all ticked off. So that was the only work done on that. And if I wander this way, the other area of progress has been on the Morris, where George has been doing a bit of work getting the lower dash fitted, so that and with the steering column, because we don't have the correct steering column shroud for the steering column. It's an MX5 steering column we're using, but there's some peculiarity, and I don't know all of the information on this. I'd be corrected by somebody on this, but there's a peculiarity with the particular column we have and the switchgear that we have, which means that none of the shrouds that we've had with the columns actually fit. But quite apart from that, they wouldn't fit the dash anyway, so we would have to probably cut them off and make an intermediate piece, or completely redesign the shrouds anyway. So what we've decided is we're just going to put all the switchgear in place, put the dash in place, and then scan that area, and then George will draw the shrouds and we'll 3D print them, which is just going to be it's a little bit of work, but it's probably an easier solution to the problem of getting that column shroud to look right than any other way of doing it. So George has been on with that. He's put the lower dash in, got the scanner out, and he's got the Peel 3D scanner out, and had a good go around the steering column. And I believe he's now upstairs beavering away with Fusion, trying to come up with a column shroud design. So I think that's where we're at on that. I know I'm going to have missed something on this. Ah, yes, sorry, yes. Jamie's going to have to prompt me on a few things here, because he knows what he's filmed and I've totally forgotten. You may recall 3 weeks ago, something like that, James fabricated the brace that braces underneath the diff on the rear subframe, that ties the two wishbone mounts together effectively, gives them a bit of extra bracing under the diff. That hadn't been powder coated at that stage. It now has, and that's now been fitted as well. John's got that fitted, and I think that is then pretty much where we're at with the Morris. There's been bits of progress going on the E-Type, but nothing huge, no huge strides forward. We're basically working on bracketry in the engine bay and designing I think we touched on last week, designing the bracket that's carrying the throttle motor, because we're using the drive-by-wire throttle motor, GMV drive-by-wire throttle motor in that. He's designed and fitted, made the prototype and fitted the bracket for the throttle motor. He's been working on the coil pack brackets for part of the week this week, and slogging through that, because there's a lot to get in, not a lot of space. So that's been the main focus of operations on the E-Type this week, is just getting that bracket designed so that we can mount the coil packs correctly on the front of there. I think that pretty much wraps up where we're at this side. I think I'm hoping I've covered everything there. I'm bound to have forgotten something. We'll move on to next door. We'll go through to fabrication. So I say it's a bit like Cal last week, possibly being a bit brief in the fabrication area. This time I'll be a little bit brief in the assembly area, because I'm not quite so au fait with everything that's going on. Whereas through here, I'm fairly au fait with everything that's going on, reasonably anyway. Right, so Project 1, Mark 1 Escort, progressing reasonably well. we had a slight setback with radiators, but that's not the, we'll get that resolved. We'll cover that more in the future once we've got a solution. Tom's been working on, but basically Tom and Scott have been intermingling tasks on this a bit this week because there's been a few little bits and bobs to tidy up. I had a look over the wing to scuttle joins, and Scott wasn't entirely happy with them and I wasn't entirely happy with them. So we had a bit of another revision of the wing to scuttle area on this. I'm going to step round here. Basically this area here, which I think Carl mentioned last week, is a nightmare. I've mentioned it before, and it is the real giveaway on a car as to how well the panels fit on a MK1 Escort. And it was very, very close to being good last week, but not quite. Yeah, the problem was the heights between, although the gaps were fairly good, the heights were slightly out. So that when we leaded it, we would end up with quite a large thickness of lead there. And I didn't really, when I say a large thickness, I would probably, at the thickest points, we were probably going to end up with maybe 4 millimeters thickness of lead. And I don't really want that. I'd rather keep it less than that. So what we've done is Scott's, this side he managed to actually reshape with a bit more reshaping of the wing and altering the height of the wing because the height wasn't quite right. He's actually got that pretty good without having to cut anything. The other side, he's split the corner of the scuttle open, cut that open, opened it up, pulled the vertical face outwards and pulled the top face upwards, generated a gap in that and then shaped a piece to form a new corner and TIG welded that in. And basically it's quite a lot of work, but it's raised up the top face to get it in the right place, and it's pulled the outer face forward to close up the gap, which we just couldn't do any other way. And that's now looking really good both sides, and we'll be able to get a good lead fill on that, and we'll be really happy with that. So at that point he's then welded the bottom of the pillars. We'll braze fill those anyway, but he's welded. I suggested we just MIG weld across the main piece there, just from a strength point of view. You might as well do that. So that's done. Happy with that. The next stage was to get the bonnet hinges mounted. In order to mount the bonnet hinges, we need to take the engine and gearbox out because the jig I made for the engine bay, which picked up the bonnet hinge locations, was a bit of a problem. It wasn't really a mistake with the jig. The problem was that the car wasn't straight. So I made the jig to suit the car, but the car was bent. The inner wings were bent. And because of that, I couldn't really do anything other than what I did in terms of making the jig, but it meant that the jig just doesn't fit. When the inner wings aren't bent, it doesn't fit. So it's of no benefit whatsoever, because what it does now is put the bonnet hinges in the wrong places if you try and use it to line them up. So we forgot the idea of trying to use the jig and concluded that the best bet was going to be, especially given that the carbon bonnet's never going to have quite the same mounting, the mounting points are going to have moved slightly compared to the original Ford steel one. What we concluded was that we would put the bonnet on with the hinges to it, and then Tom can go in the engine bay and mark out where the hinges go and tack them in place with the bonnet on, and then we know that it's in the right place because we can align it first. So we've done that. Obviously we've got bits of work to do in terms of getting the fit right. There's a few areas where we've got to improve things, but the basics are there, and the bonnet hinges are now tacked in place. I think they're tacked. I don't think they're fully welded. I'm not actually sure. I'm looking in the wrong place. Yeah, I don't think he's fully welded them yet, but the bonnet hinges are basically in place now. And we've got adjustment enough that we can get the bonnet in all aligned correctly. I say we've got a bit of work to do in terms of the fit and finish of the bonnet, but the fundamentals of it being attached to hinges which are in the right place are now there. At the rear end, Scott's been working on the inner arch tubs again. He'd done one last week. He's finished off that one. He's done the other side, and he's then doing the blends, I suppose you'd call it, basically where the rear part of the tub then connects into what would have been the spare wheel well. The car's not having a spare wheel, but where that connects into what was the spare wheel well, and where it connects into the equivalent of the spare wheel well that isn't on the other side. I suppose it's the fuel tank well originally, where that connects into there. So he's just been finishing those bits and making the little tabs that connect all that tie all that lot together. So that's pretty much wrapped up now. Tom's going to carry on with the front. As I say, we had a slight hitch with the radiator in that we received the radiators that for the cars. However, on inspecting them this morning, I discovered that they are both damaged. Now, I think they were damaged before being packaged. They weren't damaged in their packaging, but anyway, I'm talking to the supplier on that because they're very much not fit for purpose, and we can't. And I need a radiator to be able to do the metalwork on the inner front panel, and that needs to be done before we can do the metalwork for the dry sump tank. So that is holding proceedings up now, which is quite irritating because that was a key to quite a bit of work on the front of the car. The next stage on the rear is going to be to build the rear suspension turrets, make a little jig to locate the suspension turret tops in the correct place, which I've got a plan for now. I've actually got a jig that I made for another car a while ago, which I've just found. So I'm going to modify that one and use that to tie the suspension turrets into the right places. We get the turrets in, then we've got to cut a huge chunk of the over axle area and boot floor out. And then that leads me on to what I've been working on, which is we are then going to mount the rear subframe in. And finally, I've actually managed to get a few hours on it this week, and we have a rear subframe, which is give or take a couple of finished welds. I've got a little weld to do under here, I've got a couple of welds under here and a little bit to do here, and obviously lock nuts on here, and these rusty rose joints are only mock-up ones and things like that. There's loads of bits that are not the final parts on there, but basically we have the first of the two rear subframes done. I have all the parts to build the second one now. I've thrown the wishbones on loosely just so you can see where they actually go. That's basically where the wishbones live. These extrusions are just holding it together. They were just to hold everything flat on the bench, keep everything level and in place, but now you can see how it actually works. The diff is mounted at 3 places, there, and a bush down in there to this large M14 bolt here. And that's mounted on BMW E36 diff mounting rubbers, and the E36 diff is mounted in very much the same way, except that the front nose mount on an E36 is pressed into a tube in the subframe, and then the bolt is threaded into the diff. On this, I've done it the other way around. Because of the space constraints, the bush is actually pressed into a receiver which is bolted to the diff itself, and then the bolt just comes through a sleeve in the subframe. So that's kind of the other way around. The rest of it is basically as per the BMW setup. This is the modified setup. The original setup I did on Gordon's car used the diff as a stress member. I actually much preferred that setup. It was much more rigid, much stronger, and a much nicer setup. The downside was the noise transmission was deemed too great in the end. I mean, if it was a competition vehicle, it would have been no problem at all. But the rest of the car was so refined that the diff whine that was transmitted through the car was just detracted from the refinement, and it was quite irritating. So that's when I did the revision to this setup with the bushes and unstress the diff and make the subframe carry the loads. The downside is then that it puts a lot more load into the subframe, and the subframe isn't anywhere near as rigid as it would have been with the diff in it. That said, it's plenty rigid enough to take the suspension and drive loads, so it doesn't worry me. It's just annoying that it's not quite as nice a setup as it was when I first designed it. But anyway, that's now together. We're going to make some little jig fixtures. I've got some top hats that, let me just pick one up. Got these little top hat aluminium adapters that go into there to substitute the rubber bushes, or the polyurethane bushes that go in here. These substitute those so they don't get damaged, and we put those aluminium top hats into all the mounts, and then I'm going to make some little jig fixtures that bolt the subframe to the select jig in the correct location under the car. We do them from the CAD. We've got the CAD drawing of the whole lot all built. You know, basically the car on the jig is all in CAD. I know where the axle centre lines are, know what height it's got to be, so I'll then make the jig fixtures. We'll just CNC those out to bolt the whole subframe down onto the select jig in the correct location, at the correct height, on the axle centre line, and then we'll fabricate the brackets, the shear plates that basically pick up each of these points. These tie into the rear face of the suspension turret, which comes down here. Was it there? Can't remember which side it is now. Anyway, the rear bushes tie into one side of the suspension turret plus a bracket. The front ones tie in just inboard of where the original leaf spring hanger mounts were. They tie into a bracket that goes off next to where the original leaf spring hangers were. And that will just basically tie straight into the chassis rails. So it's a very neat setup. As I say, the downside is it's such, you can see now it's built, how compact it is, and why rather than just using an off-the-shelf, why I did it this way, rather than using an off-the-shelf subframe from another car, because it's basically, I mean, obviously it's sat up higher on these, but the overall height is, you know, that. It's tiny, considering the load it takes. It's extremely compact. The diff is the largest bit in there. That's what sets the height. So yeah, that's all ready to go, and that's the next stage of progress on that. We'll be putting the engine back in possibly tomorrow, I think. Now that we've got the bonnet hinges done, the engine can go back in, so that we've got that to work around in terms of dry build. So that's where we're at with the Escort. I think that's covered pretty much everything on that. There's been other little bits and bobs going on, but we'll cover them another time when we've got a bit more done. So we'll move on to the Churchill Jaguar. Stu's put this quarter back on because he's been checking for symmetry and trying to work the far side of the car to match this side. So we'll go round to this side so we can see what's been happening here. Stu's been working on the inner arch tub this side, which has been fighting him quite a bit. He's been battling this, and it's been quite a lengthy job, and understandably so. They are quite tricky to shape. And because you can see here the lack of gap, the lack of distance between the outer panel work and the inner panel work, it's very, very tricky to get the shape of this completely correct and not interfere with the shape of the outside of the car and cause the outer panels to be incorrect from one side to the other. So he's had the wheels on and off an awful lot, checking for wheel clearance, and had the quarters on and off, checking to make sure that he's not pushing the quarters into the incorrect locations by doing the inner arch tubs. But he's battled and battled that. He's been very stoic Stu, as he always is, and battled on with this inner arch tub, and he now basically has it there. So he's now that's all done, he's moved on to getting the car ready so that the shell can go onto a rotisserie. And also this is potentially, depending on what we're doing in bumpers wise, I'm not completely sure, Cal would know on that, but certainly we're putting provisions in so that we can use maybe for exhaust mounts, maybe for bumper mounts, but primarily so that we can support the car once it's on the rotisserie, because we have to put the car on the rotisserie at the end to be able to blast it and zinc metal spray it, and also do the underside paint work, do the Raptor coating on the underside. So we have to put it on a rotisserie to do that, and the rear panel work doesn't allow that because it's all smooth and fared in. There aren't any places to attach the car to the rotisserie. So he's putting these holes through the chassis rails, which he's going to put crush tubes through, and those crush tubes will enable us to bolt a fixture. It's easy to show while the quarter panel's not here. We'll bolt a fixture that comes underneath the car. Actually, sorry, I tell a lie. I don't know if it's going to go underneath the car or from within the boot. I can't remember which way around he's going to do it now, but he's going to do a fixture which comes off the chassis rail, picks up off those two crush tubes, and then carries the rear of the car on the rotisserie. It's a really strong way of doing it, and it just means that we've got a means of carrying the car for all the further stages of the job. Also, note down here, we've touched on these before, but Stu's also got the outer arch lip all prepped and ready to cut into the quarter panel once he moves on to doing the outer quarter this side. So yeah, but all full steam ahead on the metalwork on this, and it's all coming together quite well. It's proved, I think Stu's found it pretty stressful doing these arch tubs. So yeah, I think he'll be glad when they're finished. Oh, and the other thing he's done, which also ties into the arch tub literally, is the C-pillar. There's an inner structure, which I think you'll have seen in previous videos. There's an inner structure that comes down and actually is a box section sort of within this area, which originally sat onto and sort of had a foot that was welded to the inner arch tub. And now he's obviously modified the inner arches and moved them up and made a lot of changes there. He's obviously had to cut the bottom off those inner C-pillars, and then he's remade the feet of the inner C-pillars so that they sit onto the new revised inner arch tub. So he's done that as well, so that's all ready to go. So it'll be soon onto the outer quarter, plus finishing putting his crush tubes in the chassis rails. So that's where the next stages will be on that. That's where we're at with Churchill. I think we'll have a little wander around to the body shop then. There's a lot of bits and bobs going on in there, all sorts of tasks afoot. I'll start with one of the things that Tom had been working on also this week, which is this, which the eagle-eyed might recognise as a Jensen CV8 rear window aperture made in aluminium. We were happy with the way the front window aperture panned out on that, making the aperture former, if you like, in aluminium. then gluing it to the glass via spacers of the size that we wanted the gap to the trim to be. I'm just looking around to see if I can see the actual form, the glass with the former on it, but I can't actually see where it's gone. Anyway, I think we explained it last week, and it's the same job this time. Basically, Rich has routed out some stepped blocks which give us the gap that we want to use for the rubber fillet that goes with the bonded in glass. Bear in mind, the background to all of this is we're modifying the body shell so that we can use bonded in glass rather than rubber seal in glass, rather than the push-in type glass. And we don't want to modify the glass because the glass tooling is obviously to suit the original type glass, so we're modifying the body to make the apertures the right size so that we can bond in the original type glass. Now it's new glass we've had made, Pilkington have made that, and we've sourced that via Euroglass, but we're modifying the body so that we can bond that glass in. The front aperture in aluminium went so well, and we're so happy with the result. It's given us such a nice, clean, crisp aperture that we're very happy that the KS Composites will be able to get a good mould from it, that we decided that actually it might be prudent to do the same with the back. So we're going to cut that aperture out after all that work and then bond that into the shell, basically fiberglass that in as the aperture former. But as I say, it'll be supported by the glass inserted into here with MDF blocks all the way around, which set the relationship between the glass and the aluminium frame correctly. That'll be glued in so that none of the aluminium can flex and move and twist, because as you can see it's pretty flexible. That'll be glued onto the glass via a whole sequence of these little blocks all the way around, so that then we can fix that screen fix that aperture into the shell. It'll be held in the right position, and once that's all fiberglassed in, then we can cut the glue out, cut the screen out, cut all the blocks off, sand the remains away, and that'll be great. That'll be an aperture that's all exactly the right size and exactly correct for the glass, and correct for the little rubber, the E30M3 type fillet that we're using to go around the glass. So that's what's going on there. Lots of waffle basically from me, because I'm not very good at explaining things when I'm on camera. Here you might recognise these bits as being bits of Chevette. These are bits of Chevette. The key is the colour of this bit here. It's a grey one. I won't mention, I haven't told him I'm mentioning him, so I won't mention his name. Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. But anyway, we built a metallic grey Chevette a while ago, which is a rally car, and it is used very frequently in anger. And it was used in anger enough that once again it might have hit something a bit, and so we've got some panel repairs to do. And while we got a bit of a lull for various reasons, our customer brought those panels in, and we've now pretty much, I mean, they're not going to be perfect because this is at least the second, possibly the third time they've been knocked off things, so they're getting a little bit battered. There was quite a lot of smashed fiberglass, so that's been pieced back together, rematted, re-resined, tidied up, bit of filler work done. Fairly quick, not particularly tight. You know, we haven't gone to the nth degree and trying to make them perfect, because they're never going to be now. We've got them pretty reasonable, so they've got to be blocked. Next couple of days we'll block sand all that and get it all reasonably straight, and then they can be painted. They can go back to him so he can get the car back together. I think he was talking about hoping to do the Mull Rally this year. Not putting any pressure on, because I don't know if he's going to get an entry yet, but he's hoping to do Mull, he was saying. So I don't know if the car's out one more time before then, or whether Mull is the next time out, I'm not sure. But yeah, hopefully you might see that car doing the Mull Rally. You never know, fingers crossed. Hope he gets an entry. I think it's a lottery entry, he was saying, so we'll see. So that's where we're at with that. And then around behind me here, Rich has been busy. I think last week, did this come out of the mould last week? It did, didn't it, I think? Yeah, Rich moulded this last week and cracked it out of the mould last week. It had a few pockets in it. Understandably, it's quite difficult to vacuum into the mould. There's quite a lot of edges, and neither Rich nor any of us are absolute gurus when it comes to fiberglass moulding. So Rich has been tidying up, filling various pockets, tidying those up, squaring edges up, generally cleaning everything up and getting it nice. and then that's had some polyester sprayed on it. Once you've done a bit of basic filler work to tidy up any dips and whatever, then that's had some polyester spray filler on it, and he's then just in the process of prepping the polyester. Next phase will probably be maybe another coat of polyester and a bit more blocking, and then a final check. We've done a little trial fit in the car and the fit's all good. We're really happy with that. We've got to work out all the fixing method for, well, we know loosely the fixing method, it's going to be bolts, but we've got to actually finalise the fixing method, put all the holes in and get it so it bolts in, and then we can do the final primer and paint on that. So that's coming along nicely. Rich is doing well on that. Rich has also been having a bit of a clean up and tidy up and spruce of the place, because we've got a little bit of an open day for a car club on Saturday this week. We've got a few people coming for a little look round on an open day, so we've just been trying to get the workshop a little bit tidy. It's a good excuse to tidy up all the little corners of the workshop and all the bits you never quite get round to doing because they're never really a priority and you're too busy doing other things. So we were using that as an excuse to try and tidy the place up a bit, ready for our visitors on Saturday. So hopefully that'll go nicely. We'll have some bacon rolls and coffees and have a nice little chat and wander around, and hopefully our visitors will enjoy that. And I think that's pretty much where we're at in terms of the body shop. Again, there's been other bits going on in the background. Don't think that was everything, but I'm not going to go into detail on every little bit that was going on. That's all the fundamentals. Gaz has also been working on the Jensen in the background to all that. He's also been doing some filler work on the far side of the Jensen, doing the blends from the quarters into the doors, because we never had a door skin. We never had the door skins before on the car. He had done the quarters but blocked them to an open space, which obviously doesn't now flow into the door. So he's now doing the block sanding into the door, both front and back, to get the blend right on that. And obviously he's also been blending the front screen aperture, and he will the next task will be cutting in that rear screen aperture and getting all the blend into that. So we're getting there. He's broken the back of this now. We are getting pretty well through it. There's still plenty to do, but in terms of filler work, we're probably not pallets of filler away from the end now. So then it'll be KS to look at it and tell us that we need more filler. But on that note, I think that pretty much sums up where we're at. And yeah, I think we'll probably return to the two-man format next week when both Cal and I are here. So until then, yeah, have fun and we'll see you next week.